Welcome to the second episode of the Cinema Romantic Recommends. Growing up, comic books and superheroes shaped a lot of my childhood, largely in part when in the early 2000s, comic book movies were taking their first baby steps to becoming box office dominators. The Raimi Spider-Man films, Fox's X-Men movies, and the film that would start a whole cinematic universe, Iron Man, were highly influential in launching the subgenre. While superhero films aren't my all-time favorites, I have a soft spot for Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Chris Evans' Captain America, and for the most part, any interpretation of Spider-Man. But none have compared to my love of one superhero in particular.
Don't kill me, man! Don't kill me! Don't kill me, man!
I'm not going to kill you. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me.
What are you?
I'm Batman.
Batman has had a huge impact on me throughout the years. I think it's safe to say the two big geekiest fans I was all about when I was growing up were Batman and Star Wars. Quite honestly, I know way too much about both. Like Star Wars, I had the action figures, the comics, the video games, and of course, I was all about the movies. I watched them all, from the highs of the Burton Batman outings to the lows of the Schumacher era and back to the grittier, realistic Nolan interpretations. The span from the late 80s to the late 2000s was a great time to be engrossed in Batman content. As the title suggests, this episode's recommendation is to narrow down my favorite Batman film of all time. For a good period, it was Nolan's 2008 crime thriller The Dark Knight. And there's a lot to be said for the film as a whole, and it still holds up as one of the best comic book movies to date. However, while it is from the same time, the best Batman film isn't from any of the eras I've mentioned. Before we talk about the greatest Batman film of all time, we have to take a blast to the past and talk about the greatest interpretation of Batman ever. Batman, the animated series. In all honesty, I can make a whole other video just on this show. I omitted this earlier on purpose because this show was and is the defining Batman property for me. Warner Brothers at the time gave the reins to now Batman creative icons Bruce Timm and Paul Dini to create a Batman cartoon. What was brought to life was something far more than anyone would have ever thought a Batman show could be. Batman the Animated Series is a tour de force of what comic book stories can be. While being made for kids, this was not a kids show. Much like Star Wars The Clone Wars, Batman the Animated Series was not afraid to go dark. Around the same time, comic books were experiencing a period known as the Dark Age. This period of comic book releases from the late 1980s to the early 2000s saw a much darker shift in storylines, themes, and elements included in superhero tales. It was also a time where Batman finally seemed to find his stride once again in the comics. Comic book readers at this time saw the release of now renowned Batman tales with stories like The Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, The Long Halloween, Arkham Asylum, and personal favorite of mine, The Killing Joke. While it never went to the darker depths that the comic books went to, Batman the Animated Series proved to be bolder than any comic book property before. I often credit Twin Peaks to the creation of cinematic television. In contrast though, Batman the Animated Series is a catalyst to animated cinematic television. There was nothing like this show. Its striking visuals that owed itself to classic noir cinema, the swelling and haunting scores done by Shirley Walker, added to this feeling that every 22-minute episode you watched was a short cinematic experience. Yet the show wasn't afraid to take advantage of the best things Batman had to offer. It leans heavily into its fantasy qualities with its more outlandish sci-fi elements and colorful rogues gallery that Batman was always known for. But what the show did better than even the comic book counterparts was the fleshing out of characters. So many characters, both heroes and villains, were given a chance to be explored and just now fully realized. Many of the best storylines in this show revolve around characters who tragically fall from grace and become villains we now know all too well. The two-part Two-Face arc, the Feet of Clay episodes, and the beautifully haunting backstory rewrite of Mr. Freeze and Heart of Ice are standouts in tragic storytelling that hadn't been seen in Batman before. Like icing on the cake to top it all off, the show brought forth the best performances of these Batman characters to date. Every supporting ally and adversary to the Caped Crusader are exactly how you thought they'd be ever since you read a comic book. As much as it took from its source material, it also wasn't afraid to bring in new faces either. Batman the Animated Series is responsible for the creation of character Harley Quinn, who has now become a staple in pop culture and Batman media ever since her first appearance. But there are two performances that must be mentioned because you cannot talk about this show without bringing them to light. These are the turn-ins from Kevin Conroy, who plays Bruce Wayne / Batman, and Mark Hamill, who plays the infamous clown prince of crime, the Joker. It often gets debated as to who the best interpretations of these two characters are. Keaton, Bale, and Affleck always get brought into the mix as far as Batman goes, and Nicholson, Phoenix, and Ledger always pop to mind as far as the Joker is concerned. But if you have seen the show, none of these takes compare to the brilliance of Conroy and Hamill. These two capture the essence of their characters. There's a suave eccentricness brought to Conroy's performance as Bruce that morphs into a deep stoicness when he dons the cape and cowl. It really highlights the difference between the two very different people that the character is. It also adds to its haunted nature, and it always feels like Conroy truly understands what it's like to be the Batman.
No, not now.
You are a disgrace.
No, you are not my father. I am not a disgrace. I am vengeance. I am the Knight. I am Batman.
Then there's Mark Hamill. The role was originally meant to go to Tim Curry, but Warner Brothers ended up bringing in the man who played one of the greatest heroes of all time, the Luke Skywalker, to play one of the greatest villains of all time. And trust me when I say, no one will ever be better than Hamill's Joker. There's something brilliantly genius about his take. It meshes everything about the character you know and love. His chaotic attitude and complete lack of concern for the lives of those around him play up to the darker aspects that the villain has embraced, while also bringing in the charm and wit of a more lighthearted character that at times you can't help but laugh at.
Colonel What's-His-Name has chickens, and they don't even have mustaches. You can be my very own little mermaid.
You're really sick, you know that, boss?
If it wasn't enough to praise their outings here, the true testament to how well these two work together can be seen in Batman content for well over the past 25 years. These two have reprised their roles in countless pieces of Batman media, including the spectacularly done Arkham video game series. So far, it's been a lot. but I needed to set the stage before we go into this week's pick, because the greatest Batman film ever made, and one of the greatest superhero movies ever brought to screen, is 1993's Batman: Mask of the Phantasm. The film is an hour and 16 minutes long and tells the story of Batman as he comes face to face with a new character, the Phantasm, who is mistaken for Batman and killing mob bosses in Gotham. All the while, Bruce must face an even more dangerous enemy, his past, with the arrival of an old flame, Andrea Beaumont. It takes place in the same world as Batman the Animated Series, and it shows. The movie feels like an extended episode of the show, with a slightly higher budget than they normally would have. The animation is tighter and more refined, which is saying a lot because the show's animation is pure perfection. Plus, the incredible score done especially for the movie by Batman the Animated Series composer Shirley Walker adds to the gothic brilliance of the character, with its haunting choir chants accompanied by booming orchestral moments that scream the Dark Knight. Despite it being a tie-in to the show, this film is incredibly accessible. You don't have to have seen the show to appreciate Phantasm. More likely than not, I would actually recommend this for people to see before they watch the show. If they like what they see here, then there's a whole show of it for those who want more. This film is hard to keep spoiler-free due to its shorter length, but I still intend to keep it pretty vague when talking about the film. Everything that makes the animated series great is here. It's dark, brooding, and unafraid to handle some pretty tough themes about sacrifice and revenge that go a lot further than a lot of other pieces of superhero media even today. Like I said earlier on, there are two elements to the narrative. There's the present day conflict and mystery of the Phantasm and why he's killing these old mob bosses. And to contrast to the present, there are vignette glimpses into the past of Bruce Wayne, where we see a younger Bruce as he takes his first steps into becoming a crime-fighting vigilante. It can feel like the origin story with superheroes is overdone, especially with characters that have had multiple interpretations throughout the years like Batman has. And yet, that's not the case here. Nothing for me captures what makes an origin story great like Batman's in this film. We really get to see a Bruce that, despite his skill set, is incredibly inexperienced. This isn't the same Batman that he is in the present day. But what makes this origin story tiers above others for the character is one word: doubt. As we see Bruce heading closer and closer to becoming who he is destined to be, we see him question his mission. The manifestation of this is Andrea, a woman who comes in and challenges Bruce's perspectives on what he does. We see him actually veer from the path he has forged for himself because of her. So much so that it culminates in one of the most haunting turns for Conroy as a character, where we see him confessing at his parents' grave that he may not be able to uphold the promise that he made all those years ago.
It doesn't mean I don't care anymore. I don't want to let you down, honest, but it just doesn't hurt so bad anymore. You can understand that, can't you? Look, I can give money to the city, they can hire more cops, let someone else take the risk, but it's different now. Please, I need it to be different now. I know I made a promise, but I didn't see this coming. I didn't count on being happy.
Much like the series, Phantasm sticks to one of the best elements that the show had to offer, the tragedy of its characters. As an audience, you know that the outcome of the events in both Bruce's past and present will not have a happy ending. We know what becomes of Bruce well before his early days are shown, and that adds to the feeling of dread we have watching the film as he fumbles and tries to figure out who he will become, because we know he is destined to become the Batman, whether he wants to or not. In the present day, we get to see the aftermath of not only his past, but Andrea's, as we see her arrival in Gotham after years of her being absent from not only the city, but Bruce's life as well. We find there's still conflict with Bruce, even though at this point he is much more of a seasoned vigilante than he was when he was in love. The film has a lot going on despite its shorter runtime, and it handles it all brilliantly. Everything ties into each other and nothing feels wasted or unnecessary. While it may seem an odd inclusion at first, the midpoint introduces the Joker to the fold, who has far more to do with what has transpired than what you are first led to believe. There's a reason for everything we are shown, and by the time the climax presents itself, it all rears its ugly head to a brutal and destructive peak. It's worth noting that they were able to get away with the use of blood in this film, and despite the animated style, each blow feels just as vicious as if it were real. To top it all off, the film includes a twist that feels incredibly well earned. It adds fervor to the tragedy of the film's final act and fits perfectly with the themes that the film has been establishing throughout. This recommendation turned out to be much longer, but I feel that it was needed for something as big as Batman Mask of the Phantasm. I wanted to bring to light not only the incredible job done with Phantasm, but the animated series as well. Batman the Animated Series still remains my favorite TV show of all time, and I wanted to recommend it as much as its movie counterpart. Both the movie and the show cement why I love the character as much as I do. With Batman Mask of the Phantasm, maybe you too will be able to discover the brilliance of one of the greatest Batman stories ever told.